My name is Jeremiah, and I am here with Alicia, Laura, Mia, and Steven, and we're going to be talking about The Passion of Joan of Arc. But first, let's introduce ourselves. So, Laura, other than The Passion of Joan of Arc, have you watched any movies since we last recorded?
I watched two films that I'd like to mention. One was The Little Things. I saw that by John Lee Hancock, which just makes me think of like a presidential assassinator, you know, with three names. I mean, sorry, John, but any three names, you know, just thinks about that. But it was a subtle serial killer film, very subtle, almost too subtle, in that I didn't hear some of it. Like, I just thought people made some choices that I honestly missed some of the dialogue, because I thought Jared Leto was great. I love Rami Malek, but I thought he made a choice to be a very subtle guy. I also don't understand why it took place in the 90s. There was no reason for that. There was nothing 90s about it. Everyone looked super not 90s. I'm a 90s girl, so I can tell, you know, I hang out with Buffy in my head all the time. I'm at the Bronze, but Joss isn't there, obviously, because he would be verbally abusive. And so the second film I saw was Framing Britney, which I thought was really just, you know, Jeremiah, I saw your Instagram post about how, you know, appropriate it was to be, and so sad to have watched The Passion of Joan of Arc this week and also Framing Britney come out the same week, because both films are so contemporary and such a crime, and we're all just bystanders to this. It's gut-wrenching what happened in both films, and there's so many parallels with mental health and how we fail as society. So those are the two films I saw.
And even on a surface level, like the shaving of the head is like a
The
big
shaving
moment,
of the head, exactly. It's just weird. It was so intense and kind of fucked up. Just because, like, Framing Britney and Passion of Joan of Arc are two films that I personally don't leave you. They stick with you, and you're having breakfast the next day and you're like, the images come back, and those faces of the men yelling it and taking over and taking control. It's very vulturistic. That's what I watched.
Very pleasant fare there. But,
yeah, it was fun. It's a fun week.
Mia, what did you watch? I guess what did we watch?
Yeah.
I should say.
I also watched Framing Britney Spears or Framing Britney. I don't know if it's her full name or not.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, and had very similar thoughts, especially with the shaving of the head. I was just like, oh my God, whoa, this is like watching the same movie here. I also read earlier this week somewhere that there's going to be another Britney Spears documentary coming out too. So excited for more of that, one that she might have actually been involved in to some extent. Yeah, so I feel like it was sort of like a fire fest, like these two docs coming out. So, but yeah, I thought that was really good. I thought it paralleled really well with watching Joan of Arc, but you know, I just thought it was really good and interesting anyways, and just made me feel really sad for Britney in a lot of ways. And then
it happened right in front of us.
Yeah, I know. And it was just like, and you know, when did Hit Me One More Time come out? Like 98 or something?
Yeah, I think it's like 98.
Yeah, so I was 12 then, so it was like really like the perfect age for like crazy Britney Spears fandom. Like everyone was obsessed with her, and I don't know, I just feel like very much like grew up with her music in all of these ways. And so and like at the time, like when the whole like Justin thing happened, like I was totally like, oh my God, how could she have cheated on him and stuff? And like now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, like fuck Justin. And he came out with some like 2-bit apology the other day.
I want to take a poll after we talk about the film. How we feel about Justin's apology.
Thumbs down. But anyways, Jeremiah and I also watched Judas and the Black Messiah, which I thought was really good. also it's about the Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. I definitely spent a lot of time over the weekend reading like Wikipedia pages about the Black Panthers because I have to admit I don't know that much about them. But I thought this was also just a really good movie and just a story that I had never heard before, and like the acting was all really good. And yeah,
Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, which I mean they're always good, but like they're phenomenal in this. I thought.
Yeah,
Keith is so good.
Yeah,
so good.
This was like maybe my favorite Daniel Kaluuya performance at this point. Well, I don't know. It's so different from Get Out, like because Get Out is so reserved, and it's like one of those movies that the more I see it, the more I appreciate how much he's doing as an actor in that movie to make it work. But the first time you see it, he's so quiet and, like I said, reserved that it's easy to just sort of miss how much work he's doing in that.
Yeah.
But in Judas and the Black Messiah, like it's like this. He goes back and forth between like this bombastic character that he has to be in public to like, you know, the head of this movement to being, you know, a guy with a personal life. And he does that balance really well.
Yeah. And especially I watched like some video clips of Fred Hampton, who he plays in the movie, giving speeches and things. And I mean, he really does such a good job of portraying him as one of those, like, you know, he is this person kind of movie titlings. So yeah, and it's just also like Fred Hampton was just, you know, where would the country and the city of Chicago be if he hadn't been assassinated by the FBI in terms of what he was doing to unite people across class, you know, in the city. You know, arguably a very different place than we are in a lot of ways today. So it's just also just so sad. And he was only 21, 22?
I think 22.
Yeah. When he was assassinated, and it's just like, oh my God, to have already accomplished so much in your incredibly young life and like what he could have done. So just very sad also. Just like Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
And Britney Spears.
We also watched Trading Places, which is a very weird movie to watch now.
Yeah.
It's like in some ways it plays to today so well because it's got this sort of eat the rich vibe, but then when you stop and think about it, it's not really about like taking down the rich. It's about like becoming rich yourself.
Yeah.
That's true.
But also there's some like stuff that, I mean, not a big surprise. It's a comedy from 1983 by John Landis of all people. So there's some stuff that doesn't age particularly well in it. Like,
yeah, there's like one scene when they say the N-word and it's just so like, oh my God.
And there's a homophobic slur. At
Yeah.
least
The
one,
whole,
maybe
the whole
two.
one.
gorilla narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The gorilla thing is
So
weird.
Yeah, I do remember
Just
that.
the like completely unnecessary nakedness of Jamie.
Really creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but I don't think it's unnecessary.
I mean, I don't.
I think
It's
Jamie
totally
Lee should be
necessary.
naked in every movie.
her body is amazing.
She
Amazing.
is. I
But then-
think she launched so much puberty
Sure.
growing up.
Yeah,
launched
she
puberty.
and
She
Carrie
launched so
Fisher
much
right around the same
puberty.
time. 1983
Full on.
was a good year for adolescent boys with gold bikini Carrie and Jamie Lee.
Yeah,
out
Jamie
there.
Yeah.
Lee. Even now on her Activia commercial, I think she should be naked.
I also watched a documentary called Time, which was very good. I recommend it. I don't really. It's about a woman and her family who the husband is in jail for a really long time, and it's just sort of like a portrait of her struggle, and it's just very well done. I don't know how to describe it. It's good, and it's on Amazon Prime, so I think that's where I watched it. So it's pretty available. Yeah. But how about Steven? What have you been watching?
Well, I kind of needed a palate cleanser after I watched the movie this week, Passion of the Joan of Arc, and it was What We Do in the Shadows. I have a big list of movies that people recommend to me that I never get around to watching. So I decided I'd try to get something that was a little bit on the fun side. And it was made in 2014, and it was directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi from Flight of the Conchords. That's where Jermaine is from. And it was just kind of an enjoyable, kind of fun movie to watch, just to kind of pass the time. And it was pretty short. It was about like an hour and a half. So it was a kind of nice bookend when I got finished with it.
The TV show is so funny.
I actually think it's
So
better
good.
than the film,
Okay.
which is hard. You know, you don't usually say that, but
Matt Berry. I mean,
Mhm.
he's one of my
That-
all-time favorites, but in this he's just so funny in
Yeah.
this. So
Okay.
hilarious.
You gotta watch it.
You
Mhm.
should really watch it.
And one of the characters looked like Nosferatu, which was kind of interesting because that was another silent movie that I actually did see. Not this week, but I've seen in general.
And how about you, Alicia?
So I am staying at my mom and stepdad's house in Florida right now. So I'm a little bit at the mercy of what my mom wants to watch on TV most nights. It's been a lot of Midsummer Murders and other PBS fare. But we did one night watch Little Things, Laura. So I watched that too. I thought it was really derivative, really mediocre. I did not enjoy it very much. I kind of didn't understand what happened in certain parts of it. And yeah, I think the only reason for them to for the movie to be taking place in like 1990 was so that they wouldn't have cell phones where they could be tracked for their location.
Did you have problems with the sound?
Well, we had the dishwasher running while we were
Oh.
watching it, but I do remember that I kept telling my mom I can't hear anything.
I couldn't
like,
hear it.
turn
I
it
couldn't
up.
hear some of
Yeah.
it.
So yeah, maybe it was really maybe the problem was really more on the films.
Maybe the
I would say
mixing.
movies probably.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe. Yeah, that could be. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it very much. But I watched I watched all 4 seasons of Search Party, which I really enjoyed, way more than I was expecting to enjoy that show. I really liked it. It's really dark and also like really deeply, darkly funny. And yeah, I think, and then that's kind of all I really got into this week. So
Whenever I watch crime things that take place before the age of like cell phones and tracking and credit card tracking and surveillance cameras everywhere, I'm like, oh my God, crime was so easy to do, 20, 30
My
years
favorite thing is
ago.
when people talk about balancing their checkbook,
I
and
know.
it's just it automatically dates it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Nobody fucking does that anymore. Nobody's ever gonna
Who
do
has
that
a
again.
checkbook?
No.
I actually
I'm
have a
just-
checkbook.
Shut up, Steven.
I have
I
one
do.
somewhere.
I mean, yeah, I
You
have
guys are
checks
killing
somewhere.
me.
Yeah.
You guys have checkbooks?
Yes.
yeah,
I mean,
I still
Well, 'cause you need it
Thoroughly
for rent.
irresponsible.
yeah, I haven't had to pull a check off of it in a
Yeah.
while, but
But every once in a while, there's like that one random
Man.
thing that it's like
Yeah.
only checks.
it's also like 5 addresses ago for me.
Yeah,
now.
that's what I was going to say
Like,
too.
my address on top of the checks is
Yeah.
super old.
Oh,
So, for those who may not have heard our first episode, this is a podcast where the 5 of us will be discussing movies that have appeared on Sight and Sound Magazine's poll of the greatest movies ever made. That comes out every 10 years. The next one will be out in 2022, so we're using it as a prompt to watch some classic movies, and we invite listeners to take part in the discussions about the movies we're watching by watching along and sharing their opinions in our Facebook group, by emailing, or by leaving a voice message on our anchor.fm show page. And in our first episode, we each picked a movie for our first round of discussions. And Mia picked The Passion of Joan of Arc as our first film. So a little bit of background info on that before we get into our discussion. Released in 1928 and directed by Carl Dreyer, the movie depicts the final days of Joan of Arc as she was held captive by the English and stands trial at the hands of clerics who doubt her claims of being an agent of God. In it, Maria Falconetti, as Joan, depicts a would-be saint struggling to keep her faith in the face of persecution and death. As a film, it's known for its heavy reliance on close-ups, especially those of Falconetti, as you see every raw emotion on her face from moment to moment. Dreyer, a Danish filmmaker, was invited by a French company to make the film, which was itself controversial among many of the French who believed the story of such a hero of France should be told by a French filmmaker. Almost immediately after the film was finished, it was compromised through censorship and fire, leaving versions of the film that Dreyer was unhappy with as the ones that people mainly saw for years. Even then, though, it was still considered a critical success and even a quick classic. So, Mia, why did you pick this one, and what were your thoughts on it after watching it?
So I had picked this movie because you had told me about it early on when we started dating, and I'd never heard of it before. And you said it was one of your favorite movies. So I've just kind of been on my list of like, oh, I should watch that over the years. I know, right? It's good for Valentine's
Yeah.
Day, though. Not that I necessarily consider myself a movie person now, but I was absolutely not a movie person before Jeremiah got a hold of my life. I would like
As he
maybe,
does.
I know, right? I would maybe see like
Got it.
2 movies a year or something. Like I would like watch stuff on like Netflix and things like that, but like more like TV shows. And yeah, like I would only go to a movie very, very rarely. So anyways, I just have now been exposed to the cinema. And and so anyway, so I'd wanted to watch it for that reason. And so among some others, of just being curious about it and stuff. But my thoughts on it. So I thought it was a very impressive movie, but I did not enjoy watching it especially. And I don't really say that I like it. I think everyone should see it to have the experience of it. Like I understand why it's a classic created movie. I think the whole story about like the different versions is really interesting. The cinematographic techniques with all the close-ups and things like that I think is really interesting. But it wasn't like a movie that I was like, oh, whoa, that was like such a good movie. Can't wait to watch it again.
I was curious. To me, there's certain movies that, I saying that I like them or enjoy them is harder to say than I appreciate them, because they're not necessarily the kind of story, that's enjoyable. They're like hard movies to watch, or they're just about a darker subject matter. And I do think this falls into that. I think there's parts of it, like the filmmaking, that like I do enjoy, but I understand what you mean. Like, I'm just curious if that's kind of what you're saying. It's like a movie you appreciate, but like isn't the right word.
I think yes for that. I'm just going to say it too. I got a little bored with her face after a while, and all of the times of her eyes being, I almost made a joke to you when we were watching it of like, oh my God, her eyes must have been so tired at the end of every day for filming, of just being like super wide-eyed, like constantly.
You know how much bitch be paying for the cheekbones like that these days?
I thought that in those days, since they were like silent film actors, they sort of went with the territory when it came to doing something like that. So they might have been used to it. But
that's true. That's true. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, maybe like more expressive faces than we have to, because that's the only thing you had to rely on. But yeah, I feel like it could have been a little shorter, which is frequently how I feel about movies. But yeah, like, I don't know. I guess I just kind of thought like, oh, interesting part, or beginning part, very interesting, setting the scene, all of this stuff. And then the end part when they're like burning her, like that was, more interesting, but kind of a lot of stuff in the middle. I just felt like it was a little repetitive and didn't need to like it. The story could have moved a little faster. Sorry, Joan.
I guess one thing that's worth pointing out though is that all the dialogue in the movie supposedly comes straight from transcripts from the trial. So I think that's kind of why it has those repetitive things to it.
Laborious.
Yeah, because it's trying to like show
what they put her through.
Yeah,
they're
and
trying
they
to
were
break
just like
her down,
doggedly like going after her.
Yeah, and I liked her answers to stuff, like the whole question about are you in a state of grace right now? Because I guess it's like you wouldn't know that you're in a state of grace, so she couldn't say yes, but if she said no, it would also not be true to her or whatever. So I mean, she had like good responses, and definitely watching it, I felt very like infuriated on her behalf. We were talking about the Britney Spears documentary earlier, like really similar, just like you're this person, you have these convictions, or this, trying to have control over your agency as a person or over your life, and just feeling like no matter what you say or do, you're getting screwed over for it. Like I definitely, when they were just coming at her with questions and stuff, it certainly reminded me of Christine Blasey Ford testifying about the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and other times that women have spoken up, for themselves or gone against the grain of society somehow, and just feeling like, no matter what you do or say, you're going to be pilloried for it. So yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of it, but or not enjoyed, I guess, but like, I felt like very sympathetic. Yeah, I felt very sympathetic for her, but it was just, there's a lot of wide-eyed and then like single tears leaking out.
But see, but what's interesting about your point about the single tears and your Christine Blasey Ford and Brittany, it's like all these women kept their composure. Like until for Brittany, obviously there was that one breaking point or two where she shaved her head, but those tears and those answers was what was the scariest thing that these men could possibly hear, because they couldn't control it. They couldn't just throw it off as just being emotional woman stuff. And I thought that was what was so terrifying about all of it.
To your point about it being a little long, I didn't feel like it was too long, but I did notice that my mind wandered a little bit in certain parts. But I think that also had to do with it being silent. Because I think if I had heard, the dialogue, it would have been a little more compelling. But yeah, I think with silent movies, it's kind of hard to stay engaged the whole time.
Yeah. What music did everyone listen to? I'm curious, because there's a few different, or two different options, I guess, to listen.
Oh, I just went with whatever was on the HBO Max, whatever came on.
Yeah, I know one was Portishead, which is what we listened to.
Yeah. I think
we didn't hear that at all.
Yeah, I think on HBO Max is probably I think it's called Voices of Light score, which is like the one that is on most cuts. But yeah, Criterion put out, you could listen to it with that or with a score by members of Goldfrapp and Portishead. And
now I want to see that version.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Where did you guys watch that?
On the Criterion channel streaming service. Yeah.
Yeah, which was interesting to me because, we were talking, Jeremiah and I were talking about the movie, and just when there wasn't a score to it. Okay, so I guess when they had silent movies, and maybe y'all already know this, but I did not, it would just be kind of like random. Like sometimes they'd have music that was made to go along with it. Other times it would just be the person who was like the movie hall organist or whatever would just like play music that they thought went along with it. And then the director of this movie, either the music that was supposed to go with it was lost. Is that the deal?
He never
had
as far
a
as anybody
score.
knows, he never had a preferred definitive score. And he even said at some point, like I think at a MoMA screening once, that at that point, I'm not sure when this conversation happened, he said that he didn't actually enjoy any of the scores he'd heard with the movie yet. And people took that out of context in some way, where they said he didn't want any music with the movie. But that wasn't what he actually said, I guess.
Yeah.
And
it was just interesting to me thinking like, oh, this is music that was not, I mean, it was written to go with the movie, but it's not like what the director and the other creators of the movie had envisioned, obviously. Watching the movie with music that was basically like inspired by the movie and was written to go along with it, but however many decades after the movie was first created, there was parts to me when I was like, oh, I don't know if that's the music that I would have put in that particular part. So it was, you were saying, Alicia, how, it's hard in a silent movie, like your attention drifts sometimes, which I totally agree with. But it was interesting to me because I totally had that experience, but then there were also times when I was like, oh, this music isn't probably like what I would have done here. Like this seems too elevated for this moment, or too calm for this moment, or whatever it is. So I almost feel like I had this experience of like listening to the music and watching the movie as two separate things in a way that I don't think I've ever had with a movie before, even a silent movie, because I was so like hyper aware of like, oh, this music was written like decades after the film was created.
Stephen, you were going to say something?
It's funny because when I have a tendency when I watch movies, it's sort of like I feel like they put it in there for a reason and that it was well curated. I saw it on HBO Max and I actually really enjoyed the music in it. Enjoyed is kind of a strong word, as in that I felt like it was a good place to have a lot of the music. And I know everybody's felt it was a little slow. I was feeling like it was slow at the very beginning of the movie, but as it went, I was getting more engrossed in it, and it had to do with the music choice, especially like the end parts. I was really engaged. I was much more engaged in the end than I was towards the beginning.
Yeah, I felt the music really guided me emotionally through most of the film. There were some moments where it was a little bit overwrought, like just like a little operatic or whatever, when it maybe could have been a little bit less. But overall, I thought the score, that whichever score it is that they're using for the HBO Max version, it worked for me.
I didn't think it was long at all. I really just kind of it was riveting and so contemporary and current for me. I mean, the shot by shot, there's so much behind each shot. And what was that movie, Roma?
Yeah.
It's just it's such a deliberate film that I thought it was just each shot had something interesting to it. What I do think would be fun is not fun. Wrong choice of words when it comes
fun
to
in
this
like
film.
the Joan of Arc
Yeah,
sense.
to watch it with whatever
Relative.
soundtrack you think might suit it. It doesn't, I don't know if I would want to watch Portishead. I'm, like I said, I'm a 90s girl, but that's a little too 90s for me.
I was on Wikipedia and I was kind of just looking at some of the information about the film, and there's like a whole long list of people that have created music to go along with this. So I would definitely be interested in tackling.
That sounds like a fun thing to check out, which again is the word of the night when doesn't fit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's okay to say
fucking fun. Thank you. But it was great. I mean, obviously the ending, the staccato ending where the same shot where like they're starting arming the army against the, things picked up and changed and got more frenetic. It was, it took you in a different journey at that point.
Right.
After such a long setup, but it was incredible.
Also, I think it's worth mentioning about that Portishead score. And it's not Portishead. It's like one of the guys from Portishead, one of the guys from Goldfrapp. It's not like Portishead music or something. Like there's some electric guitars in there, but they worked with like a full orchestra to record it. So it's not like just like trip hop score to Passion of
I
Joan
want
of Arc.
to see that Joan of Arc though.
But I think the thing is though that like Mia was saying before, that's kind of how these movies went into the world at the time. Is like the directors and filmmakers had no real control over how people were going to experience it, if at all, with music. And so like I feel like we're all kind of getting in a way an experience as close to you could at the time, because like it's not necessarily what the director would put on it. It's just kind of like something that someone chose to go along with it, like someone at a theater would have at the time, because they would just like she said, like maybe have an organist who's like the house organist, and they just watch the movie a couple times before the first screening and try to figure out some cues and make it up as they go. Or sometimes they'd have a full orchestra at a big screening or something like that. So there's like no telling what you would have heard back in the day. But I also I wanted to bring up the editing, because I feel like we're kind of, some of what we've talked about relates to that, like the pacing and all. Like there's so many cuts in this movie. It's very I think I read there's around 1,500 cuts in this movie, which is a lot for a 90 minute give or take movie. And I'd kind of forgotten. Like I remembered that I thought the editing was very intense and impressive, but it had been a while since I'd seen the movie, and it kind of hit me anew watching it this time. I was like, oh, this is why this movie gets me, because like the editing, just everything builds on top of itself. And I think like the stuff that you're talking about, and I'm not saying you guys are wrong to find it slow paced in parts or anything like that. I think whatever experience you have is the experience you have. But like for me in those moments, there's something there between the cuts and between the different elements of the filmmaking that like builds into a thing and sustains it. And it just like, I find the whole thing to be super intense and just, it's a whole emotional experience. And I appreciate that about it. Alicia, you had something?
I agree with you. I really, and Laura, I really found the movie just kind of like riveting overall for them, except for the few times where my mind wandered, sort of in the middle, when she was like being, when they were like trying to take her ring and stuff like that in the cell. I kind of found my mind wandering a little bit during that. But during the scenes where she was being interrogated, I found all of that really, really engrossing. And I thought the shots were beautiful. And I thought it looked like something that was filmed in like the 1950s and not the 1920s. It just seemed so ahead of its time. But specifically with regards to editing, the final sequence, also as Laura mentioned, I I thought that was great. And I kind of wondered, I'm not a film scholar really, but this, when she was being murdered, they kept sort of cutting back between the crowd, the people in the crowd, the birds in the sky, her face, the flames. And I wasn't sure if that was one of the first times that type of editing that type of sequence had been done, or not.
Oh, I kind of wonder now that you're mentioning that. I hadn't thought of it particularly before, but if this is going to sound so pretentious in film school or something, but if he was inspired, or I wonder if he was taking his cues from like someone
Maya Deren.
like, no, I was going to say Eisenstein from Russia, because that was like kind of what he was known for, of like really kind of quick cutting and going between things, and like he was. I mean, we'll get into that, I bet, at some point, because Battleship Potemkin is on this list that we'll
I
get
think
to.
that's around the right time. I
Yeah.
think Maya Deren's post this film by 20 years or something.
Yeah, Maya Deren's like later, right?
In her 40s, like well, in the 40s,
Right.
This film was made in 28.
Yeah, 28 is when it came out. But I think that there was stuff going on in movies like at the end of the sound era where it was getting so much more involved, the way people were editing, and it was getting very inventive, that I wonder how much of that well, I mean, Dreyer had a hand in creating that whole language himself before this movie, but I bet he was also inspired by other filmmakers whose work he might have seen from around the world. I don't know whose work he had access to, but it does remind me kind of other filmmakers known for that sort of stuff.
I just had one thing I guess it's a couple things to add, just because the moves I know, or the cuts were so repetitive sometimes, when something else kind of jumped into it, I paid attention to it a lot more. Like when she got spit on, that's when I knew I was invested in the movie. Like when I saw that, it was like a visceral, oh my God, I can't believe they went there. And then also with the blood scene as well. And then towards the end, it kind of, built towards something else. So when all those images were coming up, I definitely was paying attention a lot more to that, just because I was so familiar with the other characters at that point. So that it gave me something kind of to look at like more intensely.
What did you guys think of, I mean, I loved the fact that nobody had any makeup on. I thought that felt really, really modern as well, because I've seen a few other silent films and people are wearing a lot of makeup in those.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on with their faces in sort of most of the films that I've seen from that time period. So I thought this just looked really modern.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Falconetti and Antoine Artaud, those faces, they don't leave you, and they're so beautiful. Like I've seen people on the street that look like them. I know these people. There's beauty in those faces, so they don't need makeup or.
Right.
She was 36 when she played a 19-year-old.
Oh, she
I
was.
didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, I think what you're saying, Laura, though, that they look almost like people you could see on the street. I think it's that, and the fact that so much of it is in like very close up shots that makes it seem so much more contemporary, like you were saying earlier. Like there's something about it that there's a remove that he is himself removed from the filmmaking process that wasn't common at that time. Like people caked on the makeup, like Alicia was saying. People shot stuff in wide shots and just went in for close-ups here and there. It wasn't like built around close-ups like this. So it puts you in there where you can imagine Joan of Arc, this mythical person at this point, as sort of like a real human being in a way that I think wouldn't have been accomplished otherwise. So I don't know if that was the intention of it, but I think that's the effect, at least.
It just felt so real to me that, and then there were a few times where, well, as Stephen mentioned, the time that the one man spit on her, and there were a few times where like flies landed on people's faces. There was some like tense moments in there, and they kept them in, because it just was, obviously that would happen. Of course that would happen. And you wouldn't stop a court proceeding and make everyone look gorgeous.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked that.
I had a question about her hair because it was really interesting. I've seen some depictions of Joan of Arc and she's had long hair in a lot of them. And it was interesting that they kept it short and then they shortened it even more so that you really could pay attention. And maybe that was a style choice because her eyes were so luminous that they wanted to have something like that. But Jeremiah, do you know why they chose to do that at all? I was just curious.
No, that's not something I know.
I know when he saw her, so she was a stage actress, and he saw her perform in some play or another, and he was like, oh, I don't know, like this, you're not who I'm looking for. But then he saw her perform again and was like, okay, wait, never mind. And so he went to talk to her backstage, and he was like, I want to make this movie about Joan of Arc, and I want you to star in it, but no makeup, and you're gonna have to cut your hair. And so she agreed to doing the movie, but she was like, basically like, I'm going to work on him about this whole like hair and makeup thing. Like he's not serious or whatever. And then, I guess she did agree to shave her head eventually. So not at all an answer to your question, but just something that I thought that was interesting. I can just see like, she was a pretty famous actress of the time being like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this thing. But like, we'll see about this whole hair and makeup.
Well, I think the film itself deals with the gender aspect. I mean, maybe they did so much in the transcripts of the trial that was the biggest offense, that if this woman who is with the short hair and dressed as a soldier would just dress as a woman, she wouldn't have been burned.
Well, I think she involved herself in men's matters as well.
Obviously, but I mean, I think that.
Yeah, but I think that was an indicator.
Right.
Well, what I did do a little Joan of Arc. I'm a big history buff, so I did do a little Joan of Arc homework after I watched this too. And you're right, definitely like her wearing men's clothing was a big, a large aspect in her trial, which I put in air quotes. Because it was really a sham. But what I read was that a lot of the reason that she didn't want to change out of men's clothing into women's clothing was because there was some aspect of the pants that that kept men from being able to rape her while she was wearing them. So if she had changed into women's clothes, obviously she would have had no protection from that whatsoever. And I mean, they didn't really delve into that aspect in this movie, but I'm sure that was something that she was very worried about,
Yeah. And I think that even though they didn't delve into it, just like with the torture on some level with this film, it's always present because we'll see the torture devices just as we know that this woman could easily be brutalized at any second by any of these men.
Right.
Yeah, the part when they were taking her ring and stuff, I really felt like,
it was almost like a metaphor for
them
taking her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that some of this stuff I said before, I got it from our buddy JPK. He happened to have seen this movie, and he commented in our Facebook group about it, and he had show notes from a screening he saw at Columbia where they had music. But yeah, just shout out to JPK.
Big ups.
Alicia,
haven't seen him in years.
Yeah, it's been a while. Literally.
Alicia, I'm curious when you were doing some history research because so I feel like I grew up, like I'm sure most of us probably did, like hearing like the story of Joan of Arc and just like never really thinking about it super closely, and especially with a lot of the stories of the saints, it's like, they're hearing voices, there's all of they're, seeing things, whatever. And I was very interested when they were interrogating her, where they were like, oh, how do you know that it was this person? Were they naked? Were they doing this? Did they have wings? Like all of that kind of stuff. And so in any of your reading, did you come across like a modern explanation for why she said she saw these things, if there is one? Because I didn't, not that I looked like super hard, but through a cursory search I couldn't find anything.
I don't think there is really an explanation. It seems really there's probably a lot of different things that could have been. Someone seeing visions and then not having a real psychiatrist or a real doctor to ask her, really go into the details on it. I don't think we'll ever really know.
So you get some leeches or someone.
yeah, just like slice your arm open.
But going back to Framing Britney, I think last year the few months ago, there was the first year that there was a mental health awareness day, which again, I thought was such a sham for this country because it is still such a stigma. There's no infrastructure in place when people are in trouble. They don't really have the tools or the steps to get the help they need. And, when you're watching Framing Britney and you see her postpartum depression that got away from her and everything just took complete, just instead of help, she became a target and a tool and her suffering made a lot of people a lot of money. And in a way, with what happened in the Passion of Joan of Arc, with all of the townspeople performing and dancing, and I felt like it was sort of a similar thing.
Yeah, it was interesting that they said "Long live Joan," like knowing that she'd be in prison and she'd be like under duress, and they were
Right.
okay with that. They'd rather her be that way instead of the way that she
Right.
really was.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I did find in my research something interesting. I mean, I guess I never really thought about it, never really made this connection between her and sort of modern, what we sort of still deal with in this country in this day and age with religion, is that she did view this, she did receive or whatever, view this vision that she had as God telling her that it was like her duty to unite France again and get the English out of France. And she actually harnessed that before anyone else. She actually harnessed that sort of nationalistic message. They were in the middle of fighting the 100 Years' War, but it was just kind of a dynastic thing of who should be king. And the people of France probably didn't really care that much. They were just kind of doing what they were told. But she made it a real campaign of like, we have to unite France again. We have to be one country. This is our nation under God, whatever. So that really brought home to me sort of some of the things that we still deal with in this country. People feel that it's like a religious cause to, make everyone
Right.
one thing. So I don't know if you guys thought about that at all, but that kind of struck home with me.
I can't say that I thought about that. But I wonder if that's because I've seen the movie before. So I was just like, it wasn't something that I was registering as new. So I wasn't thinking of it in that context, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Well, I didn't think of it quite like that. But one thing when I was reading about the movie is the government of France said, we want to make a story, or we want to make a movie about France. And they, went to this director and said, we're going to pay you. I think it was 7 million francs or something, which I'm sure in the 1920s was, I meant to look up before we did this, like how much money is that today? Because it's probably a ton.
No idea.
Yeah. And it was just so interesting to me because I can't picture the government of America going to someone and saying, we need a movie about America. But at the time, it was still this emerging national, well, yeah, maybe, but still this like emerging national identity. And Jeremiah and I ended up talking about it more as just like government support for arts and how that's so lacking. But I just also think, at the time in Europe, countries are still kind of, so this was like pretty post World War I, right? So you've had
between the world wars.
Yeah, so you've had like this devastation, and I can just see them saying, okay, we want to cultivate this like national pride and national image. And the other two subjects for the movie, he said, okay, I want to either do Joan of Arc, Marie Antoinette, or like another royal person. So I also thought it was interesting that what they ended up going with was Joan of Arc, like the most, humble, regular person out of these options here.
I think that's a much more uplifting story than
right. I
know. Well, I think that's interesting that you that's good feedback, backstory, because I was wondering why the film didn't deal with the fact that the French soldiers sold her to the British, where she then was put on trial, because that was just glossed over completely. And now I know why, because it was French.
They were trying to put their best foot forward on this.
Right.
Yeah. Well, how about we go a little bit into some of the thoughts on the movie at the time? So,
Okay.
is that okay?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Bullshit.
But I think that could take us into some of the historical context that we're already starting to get into as
Let's
well.
do it.
The New York Times review at the time said, as a film work of art, this takes precedence over anything that has so far been produced. It makes worthy pictures of the past look like tinsel shams.
Wow.
It fills one with such intense admiration that other pictures appear but trivial in comparison. They also said it is the gifted performance of Maria Falconetti as the Maid of Orleans that rises above everything in this artistic achievement. And Variety called it, on the other hand, a deadly tiresome picture. So very
Wow.
contrasting reviews, and I think it also speaks to the prose of the New York Times versus the short terseness of Variety. But then, in just a little bit of backstory about the movie as a movie, in 1981, like we said before, people thought the movie was lost, but then in 1981, a forgotten copy of it was found in a psychiatric hospital in Oslo, and that version of the film has been more widely released over the decades, allowing people to see it basically as the filmmaker originally intended. And at the time, it was named one of the top foreign films of the year by the National Board of Review here in the United States after it came out. And in 1999, it came in 8th in the Village Voices poll for Best Film of the Century. Into our list and the emphasis of what we're doing on this show, The Passion of Joan of Arc was on the very first Sight and Sound poll back in 1952. At that time, it placed 7th. After that, I found this kind of funny. It was on every other poll. So every 20 years, it's on the poll since then. And so it was back at number 7 in 1972. Then it was up to number 6 in 1992. Then it was back down to 9 in 2012. And it appeared on the first director's poll in 1992 at number 10, but hasn't been on the director's poll since then.
That's interesting. I would have thought it placed higher because I just feel like this is a movie that like critics and directors would really like, even if like people are like, yeah,
Exactly.
okay, impressive, but it's not really like the kind of movie, again, that I think even if you think it's impressive and, you know, moving and all of that, that you're like, oh man, I want to watch that. Like, it's just so intense.
So you thought it would have been higher?
I thought that more directors and critics would have liked it. I can see it not polling as high on like people. What do you think the best movies are? But I think people who create movies and are looking at movies from this more like, you know, cinematography, editing, like that perspective, as opposed to like the story. Not that the story isn't good, but you know what I mean? Like, no, I can just see it ranking higher there. So I'm just surprised that it's only on it every other time and that it's not higher.
Well, I think that might go to something we talked about in the first episode of these films sort of getting a new look from people when there's a version available to see it. So I wouldn't be surprised if that up and down of it being on and then off of the top 10, it's probably still on the poll. It just didn't make it into the top 10 those other years. But like we just talked about, they found that print, that original print or whatever in 1981. So maybe that wasn't close enough, or maybe that was too late in the game for it to get on the list in 1982. But 10 years later or 11 years later, people were like, oh, we've been watching this movie and admire it again. And we've been able to see it the way it was meant to be. So it was on the poll in 92.
We watched a little, like a 5-minute thing that showed scenes side by side. And the original one is so much better than the one that I think people had access to for so long. It's just like...
You mean the one we've seen or?
The one we've seen.
The one we've seen is the original. But just, I mean, you know, some of it is pretty subtle or I couldn't even really tell. But just like the shots literally look so much clearer. And it's just... the way that
it was
you know,
so beautiful. I mean, each of those images was like its own.
Yeah,
it's been.
I felt
hours
if they had been in. Sorry, I was going to say I felt if they'd been in color, like almost every shot could have been a painting. Just the way they were composed, and I thought it was really beautiful too.
Was the original a lot longer? Because I thought I'd seen something. No, okay,
no. So the thing with it was that after they first lost the film, Dreyer was able to go back to the outtakes basically and pick the same shots but just a different take and put them in. Like the thing they used as an example in this short featurette we watched was the scene where they're digging that hole and there's a skull that gets flung onto the pile. And the version that we are all able to see, the version that Dreyer wanted to be in the world, the skull lands perfectly in the frame, upright, and it's just this crazy thing that happened. But in the other version that was out there for so many years, they'd lost that shot. So the shot is like, it's just kind of cockeyed and it doesn't look as impressive. So it's that sort of thing. And like, it's subtle differences. I'm sure like the pacing of the film was still there. So like some aspect of it was still in place, but he lost the shots that he wanted the film to be the first time around, and then sort of had to compromise on it. So I don't know, but
Interesting.
Did y'all notice? There was one, Stephen made me think of this again earlier. I wanted to bring it up, but when you were saying how, because so many of the shots are so similar, then when something different happens, you really notice it. Did y'all notice that like dragon chicken thing drawn on the fortress or wherever, the jail where she's being held?
Yeah, it was so weird.
It was so
noticed that.
weird. Okay, so it's in like the hallway. Like there's like
on the wall,
on the
white
wall.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's like, I don't know,
Just
maybe
walking
like
by.
like a foot by a foot it looked like or
Right.
something. And it looks like graffiti or something. Like
It
just like a
does.
drawing of this
Weird.
like dragon chicken
Yeah.
thing. And it's the only thing that's ever on the wall the whole time. And as soon as we saw it, Jeremiah and I were both just like, what is that thing there? It's just
I
so
remember that.
random.
That
And
was
there's no
weird.
way that it wouldn't, like, obviously you notice it. And I don't know. It was just this like funny. I was like, did they try and just sneak that in to provide like this little moment of levity there of just like, wait, what is that thing
It
there?
seemed pretty like light to me, but I definitely did catch that.
Yeah.
It's cool that you guys did as well. It was like a sort of split second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a little bit more historical context. Like we mentioned before, this came out between two world wars, and maybe there was a nationalistic movement behind the making of the movie, which I think plays into that timing of when it came out. And it was released a year after The Jazz Singer, which was the first movie with synced sound. So, a lot of silent, like this is one of the final like silent classic movies, really. I mean, there were some more that like kept coming out, especially Chaplin was very stubborn about going to sound. But yeah. And then I found it kind of funny that the same year this movie came out, which you could say was like one of the peaks of cinema at the time, Mickey Mouse first appeared in Steamboat Willie. And yeah, I mean, there's other stuff that we could get into. I don't know how much of it is that important.
Well, also, I guess it came out it was 1928, right? So like the
Yeah.
last year before this like global depression
Yeah.
that's going to dominate the next decade plus. So sort of like this last shining moment of,
Yeah.
the jazz age and all of that.
In terms of movies, just to give a sense of where the culture was at that time, at least in America, the very first Oscars happened, I believe, in 1929, and they were like reviewing movies from 27, 28. That was the stuff that qualified. And a movie called Wings won Outstanding Picture, and then Sunrise, which is on the list of movies we're picking from, was named Best Unique and Artistic Picture. People kind of argue about which one of those was Best Picture. One last historical thing. The top grossing movie in North America in 1928 was The Singing Fool, which I'd never heard of, but it was a follow-up to Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer, which is the first sound movie. So sort of like a moving into that era. Bye-bye silent pictures.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was everybody's favorite scene or moments in the movie, if you have one?
Well, I liked the final sequence, as I already mentioned. I really found that probably the most powerful part of the movie.
The repeat cut of dropping the gavel from the window to try and arm the army, that same cut over and over again, which kind of looked like a mistake, but also was just such a visually interesting choice, stuck with me. But I mean, her face was, there's no one shot of her that I could choose. So that's why I chose that.
I felt like the part where they were sweeping her hair up into the dustbin and her crown was in it, and it woke her up. It was
Oh,
just,
that
she had just gone with what they wanted because she was so tired, but just seeing that just meant that they'd won, and she just was like, no, I'm going to recant. And so that, for me, it just kind of switched the movie around, and she just wasn't going to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the end, the final scene, but specifically like once she's like on her knees when she's burning and like kind of like crouched forward a little bit. And that to me was just really sad because you just see this like black body outline. And yeah, it just was like very like this really emotional moment.
Right. Yeah, it's hard for me to say. Like, I think because of the way the movie's made with the quick cutting and the close-ups, it's more like micro moments. This movie is just composed of micro moments. And so when I like just try to think about the movie, I just picture Falconetti's eyes like big, and I picture like there's some camera moves in there that are, I think, very interesting. Especially, I think it's near the beginning where they're polling the judges for their verdict on something, and we see all the hands up, and it's just this very interestingly framed tracking shot where it's just sort of like the tops of their heads and their hands in the air, and it ends on, I think his character name is like the Mad Monk or something for some reason. I don't know. That doesn't really come across to me in the movie why he's called that, but and he is at the back of the crowd and he hesitates, and then the main judge looks at him and he puts his hand up because he's felt pressured into it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is the
Mm-hmm.
scene that sticks with me the most for some reason. Yeah. So do we all think this one stands the test of time or not so much?
I think it does. Yeah, I guess it depends on what the list or what you're really looking for when you watch a movie because it obviously broke barriers at the time. So if you're looking for something that was groundbreaking, then I think, it definitely stands the test of time. It looks beautiful. It looks contemporary. As far as entertainment value, it's a little bit lacking. But I don't know. For me, I think it does.
I think it's timeless, personally.
Yeah, I think it does. Just because it's rare that I see a movie that makes me think about it afterwards and think about the scenes, and maybe it is the repetition of the scenes and the way that she looked to make me really think about it afterwards. And also, I guess if you've taken any kind of film class or just have an interest in film, there's things in there that you can kind of go back to and look at.
Yeah, I think it does too. I mean, I pretty much agree with Alicia's review, but I think that, but just the story too, like even just, we've all connected it to the Britney Spears documentary that also came out in the last few days. But, I think the fact that we can so easily connect it to something. And I think even if that documentary hadn't come out, we all still probably would have had similar thoughts about, women trying to go against the grain of society and being judged unfairly for it. So I think the story is certainly timeless. And I think the filmmaking is groundbreaking, unique. There's not even movies that look like that today.
Yeah.
So put it in a time capsule for sure. But I, don't maybe watch it like on a first date. Or
Don't want to watch
like
it.
That.
Not a date.
Yeah.
No,
Although it's good.
not like a casual Saturday afternoon movie.
Although it's good if you're taking French, because the French was actually really easily readable from my
that's
3 years
true.
of high school French.
You'd be surprised what's a date movie.
I had the same thought,
Bottle.
Stephen.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, Madame Bay.
Yeah, date movies.
Did you say speaking of date movies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we
Good
get it?
segue.
Yeah. So Laura, do you want to introduce this
Yeah.
part?
Well, I wanted to know what everyone's favorite, Valentine's Day is loved and hated or ignored. And I just wonder what everyone's favorite Valentine's Day film, or I guess romantic film, is to watch when you're looking for that movie.
Well, I'm not a Valentine's Day real fan. exactly. I don't know. So I actually had to look up which movies I really enjoyed, and that they said were Valentine's Day movies. So the one that I saw, it's Gone Girl, which I don't know if it's necessarily like a Valentine's Day movie, but they did say, like, one of the quotes from one of the characters was saying, like, for Valentine's Day, I thought I'd bring a gun, or I'd buy a gun. So
that's a great choice.
But they do talk about the realism of what love is, because that was a real relationship, and the lengths that she went through. I don't want to spoil the movie for anybody, but it's just a really compelling movie to me, and I enjoyed it. And I actually saw that with Jeremiah years ago, and it's one of my top movies. I just love watching it. I like David Fincher.
Please tell me you guys went on Valentine's Day together.
I don't remember when it was, but
but I could rewatch that movie anytime. I really enjoy it, so maybe I'll watch it after this podcast. So
I don't think I've seen it since then.
I've seen it several times. I really like it.
Okay, Jeremiah, your turn. What's your
Well, when I was trying to pick one, I realized the things I was gravitating towards are all like unrequited, or ones that kind of, they can't end up together. I think that those end up being the best movies, because those stories, like, there's an open-endedness to them that
like what?
Well, the classic one, I think the one that would be actually good for a date, like an early date, is just Casablanca, just because it's such a classic. It's maybe cheesy to some people, but it's such a good movie.
I love it.
It's great. It's cheesy?
I'm not saying it's cheesy. I think some people would find going on a date to that movie cheesy.
No. If someone thinks that, don't go on another date with them.
Sure, good barometer.
Yeah.
But more recent ones, I would say, for me, are Beginners, with Ewan McGregor and Melanie Laurent and Christopher Plummer, who just passed away. He won an Oscar for that one, I think. But and then Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which we went to on Valentine's Day last year.
One of the last things we did.
Yes.
Before.
That's sweet.
I'll say for mine. So I also I don't know when I was like, oh, Valentine's Day movies, what? But I love romantic comedies. So especially on airplanes. So lacking these days. But one of my favorite movies, period, and definitely a good one for now, is When Harry Met Sally. I fucking love that movie. I could watch it like once a week, probably. I just think it's so funny. So such a love letter to New York. Hi, Luca. Such just, I love the witty, back and forth and everything. So yeah, that would be my Valentine's Day recommendation. If you're in a bad mood and not into Valentine's Day, I recommend Marriage Story, which is devastating if you have, so good, but just so devastating if you haven't seen it.
I watched half of it and I was like, no.
Yeah. We went.
I'm going to go get some chocolate.
Yeah, we went and saw it at a movie theater here, I guess last January or something.
Yeah.
And just came out, and it was like a movie theater at the bar, and we just came out of it and we were both like, I need a drink. Oh my God.
Yes.
What did we just watch? Do you really want to get married? Oh my God. And one that I've wanted to watch, and so I was trying to look up and remember it, and I guess it's out, so I was going to propose maybe we watch it later today. It's called Sylvie's Love. Has anyone seen that?
I have not.
I haven't, with Tessa Thompson.
Yes. Is it good?
Her hair looks really cute. I haven't seen.
Her hair does look really good.
She's so great.
Yeah.
I have not seen that film.
Yeah.
It does look.
Wait, was that just a Sundance?
It's on Amazon. I
it
don't know
already is?
Yeah. Well, it said it was coming out on Christmas, but I haven't seen anything about it, so I want to check and see.
It's on there.
It is? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the 40s or 50s, I think, and she's wants to be a music producer or a movie producer, and then she falls in love with this guy, but then he leaves to go on tour with his band, and she builds her life, I think, in New York City, and is this independent woman but marries someone else, and then he shows back up, and it just looks really cute, and the kind of movie you want to lay around and drink some wine to, and
cool.
look at
you guys are doing
people.
later.
Yeah.
It's Valentine's Day.
That's crazy.
It is.
Okay, Alicia.
Yeah, I was also going to say When Harry Met Sally, because that's one of the only romantic comedies I like. I'm really not a rom-com person too much. And I'm really not a Valentine's Day person at all. But I guess I also really like the old 1930s Wuthering Heights. That's a favorite, just like classic star-crossed lovers who can never get it together movie that just never fails to like move me.
Is that Laurence Olivier?
It's Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon. And yeah, it's also beautiful, just beautifully shot in my opinion, and emotional. Otherwise, I would say A Nightmare on Elm Street. If you like a scary movie and you want to like snuggle, you want to like hide your face in someone's shoulder.
That's strategic. It's a strategic movie.
I do like that. I'm not really scared of horror movies, but if you want to pretend like you're scared of a horror movie, that's a good one.
That movie is the first horror movie I ever saw, actually.
Really?
And while I was watching it with my friend Kim Solenza, who was over for a sleepover, my sister was at our next door neighbors, and they devised this whole plan to pretend that they were coming to kill us. So they started calling us on the phone, and all of a sudden they were wearing like masks and start like bombarding in, and we just go completely nuts. I think one of us, I'm not saying who, peed themselves. It was memorable. But, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
No, it was great.
I've seen all of the Nightmare on Elm Street. I think except for maybe up to like the 5th one, I've seen all of them, and I watched all of them before I was like 12.
Oh wow!
And I watched them like over and over. I don't know why. My best friend and I were really into them, and we
tough
just
as
like.
nails.
Did you see the reboot?
There.
No, I haven't seen. I think I only saw like the first 5, and then I haven't seen any of the ones after that. But yeah, we loved those movies. I don't know why we were even allowed to watch them, but we were.
I don't think I've seen any of them, actually.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of them.
The first and second one are great. So my favorite, I think to me, the most romantic film that's ever been made, I think probably most of you know this because I said it before because I go on about it, is The Terminator. I think that...
I did know that.
He travels through time for... love, Reese, with Sarah Connor, I think, and they reach feathered hair heights together, battling, this robot and Skynet and save the universe. And it's just, to me, incredible. I love that film. I love everything about it. The Walkman singing roommate, I'm going to bust you up, man. Like every line just gets... So yeah, that's my favorite Valentine's Day.
I rewatched that one in the fall while I was recovering from surgery, and it is the first time I'd seen it all the way through in probably 20 years. And it's
so good.
Yeah,
it holds up.
Pretty goddamn good.
It holds up. It really does.
Yeah.
It's romantic, and the sex scene's pretty hot. Like not for nothing, but
there you go.
It's worth it.
I'm gonna have to rewatch that because it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I don't remember all that stuff. So now that's gonna be my new Valentine's Day.
Michael Beale. He was also in Tombstone.
Bean.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Oh, good. He was Johnny Ringo in Tombstone.
Yeah.
He was in Predator too, I think.
Okay.
Was he? Might have been, yeah.
I don't know.
He's in a bunch of James Cameron movies, though.
Yeah.
He's like, he was his guy. He was in Aliens.
That's what he was in. Yeah. Aliens, not Predator. Completely wrong.
I don't remember who was in Predator other than Arnold. And 2 other governors, right? Jesse Ventura.
Yeah,
really?
That's right. The homosexual affair with the other guy in that.
I don't remember.
Remember that?
No, the homosexual undertones in that film are so incredible. I think it was really groundbreaking.
I think I only saw that movie when it came out. I was like 7 or 8. And for some reason, I went to it with my dad and my grandmother, I think.
Interesting.
I don't know why. But
anyway.
I
was, what I realized? I was conflating Jennifer Beal with Michael Beale. It was like Flashdance.
You were thinking of feathered 80s hair. I don't think she had feathered hair.
I'm surprised no one said Dirty Dancing as a Valentine's Day movie. Dirty Dancing is so good. And it's one of those ones, it's like always Dirty on Dancing? TBS and stuff.
I'm a huge fan of both Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze, now and forever, but that movie does nothing for me.
I got a lot of history with that movie. That's all I'll say for now.
If you
That's for another
subscribe to our
podcast.
After Hours podcast.
Yeah. Once we get a Patreon going,
Yeah.
that'll be there.
What's our next movie, guys? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, so our next episode is Steven's pick. So, Steven, do you want to remind us what that will be?
Sure, yeah. The pick for next week is The Magnificent Ambersons, which is directed by Orson Welles. I picked that movie just because I have only seen Citizen Kane of the movies that he's directed, and I wanted to see what else he's directed. So it was released in 1942, and you can also probably watch it on the TCM app or the website. It's also on Amazon and Google, YouTube. You'll be able to find it somewhere. It's older, so...
So, like we said before, the Stereoactive Movie Club isn't supposed to be just the five of us chatting. We want it to be an open discussion for people who want to be included. So, like Steven said, we're going to be watching Magnificent Ambersons. We invite you to share your thoughts with us before we record our next episode next week. And you can do that by joining our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Stereoactive Movie Club. You can email us at stereoactivemovieclub@gmail.com. Or you can send us a voice message on our show page at anchor.fm/Stereoactive Movie Club.
Or if you're cute, DM me.
Yes, or DM Laura, but only Laura.
And only if you're cute.
Only if you're cute. Yeah.
If you know movies.
Yes, I think if you get
Cute,
someone who's
no
cute
movies.
and is watching the Magnificent
And
Ambersons, you've hit the
I'm
jackpot,
done.
Laura.
Yeah. You must think The Terminator is the best romantic movie of
Yeah.
It is though.
There's a lid for every pot.
A lid for every pot.
Yeah.
That's our line.
It's my mom's line.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.